Is that the sound of a flag rope clicking, or someone being forgotten again? The hall smelled of coffee and polish, sunlight trembling across the glass. She scoffed, "It's just a medal," and the laugh pressed flat against the quiet walls. He didn't answer. The medal caught the light heartbeat slow beneath its case, the room holding its breath. Still quiet men leave echoes too, proof written not in words, but in shine and dust. Morning light drifted through the high windows of the Veteran Community Hall, a small brick building perched near the coast of Maine. Dust floated in thin gold threads, stirred each time the front door opened. Inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. James Haller, 58, moved slowly, but with purpose. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hands rough and steady. He wiped the glass of the old display case, careful around the brass frame. From a plain cardboard box, he lifted a small velvet case and set it gently on the shelf. The box looked out of place among the gleaming trophies and flags, too humble, too quiet. A voice came from behind him, light and curious. "What's in that one?" James glanced over his shoulder. Martha Reed, 32, stood there holding a clipboard, her volunteer badge swinging against her sweater. "Go ahead," he said. "Take a look." She flipped the latch, opened the case, and laughed softly. "It's just a medal," she said. James paused, the rag still in his hand. He looked at her, then at the medal catching the sunlight. "Maybe," he answered, his voice calm. "Depends on who's looking." The words landed like a small pebble dropped into deep water, no splash, only ripples. Martha blinked, unsure why the air felt heavier. She shut the case and tried to smile. "We'll get it cleaned up for the ceremony," she added quickly. "Sure," James replied. "Doesn't need much." From the far side of the hall, Tommy, a 14-year-old volunteer with a mop twice his height, watched the exchange. He didn't understand all of it, but something in James's tone made him stop moving. Then silence settled again. The hum of an old ceiling fan filled the gap, joined by the faint crackle of a radio perched on the window ledge. Through the static came the familiar chords of "Stand By Me." James leaned against the table for a moment, listening. The song seemed older than the building itself, older even than the sea outside. He reached out and straightened a folded flag beside the display. The flag's edge brushed against the medal's case, a quiet salute no one noticed. Martha wrote a note on her clipboard, still avoiding his eyes. "We'll need new labels," she murmured. "Half of these don't even say who they belong to." "Names fade faster than metal," James said. Tommy wrung his mop and kept working the rhythm of the swish matching the radio beat. He thought about what James had said and didn't dare ask what it meant. Outside, gulls called over the surf. The day was just beginning, but the story inside that small hall had already started, turning slow, deliberate, like a tide no one could stop. The sun had climbed higher over the main harbor, turning the hall's windows into mirrors. Inside, James Haller worked without a sound. He straightened folding chairs, replaced a flickering bulb, and raised a small flag just outside the doorway. Each motion was unhurried, precise habit carved into muscle memory. From behind a stack of boxes, Martha Reed watched him. The clatter of her clipboard suddenly felt too loud. "You've done this before." James glanced down from the stepladder, a mild smile underlined with memory. "Once or twice. A long time ago." She nodded, pretending to take notes. The radio hummed in the corner, the same old station that played songs meant for someone else's youth. Still, James kept working, retying the bunting, checking each bulb until the light ran clean and even. The place looked ready, yet he stayed a few extra minutes polishing where no one would look. Then he packed his tools, slipped his jacket on, and walked 2 blocks to Millie's Diner, the one with chrome stools and a jukebox that only played hits from before '85. The bell over the door chimed. Conversations faded just long enough for regulars to nod hello. James took his seat near the window. "Morning, Jimmy," the waitress said. "Same as always, if it still comes with free refills." She laughed and filled his cup to the brim. Around him, glass met porcelain, the rhythm of a small American morning sugar packets tearing the hiss of a grill, the gossip of fishermen one booth over. When the check came, he slid a worn $5 bill under the saucer and added an extra $1 for the refill. He folded the receipt neatly, like paperwork that still mattered. Outside, Tommy waited, sneakers scuffing the curb. "Was it really just a medal?" he asked. James looked down at the boy, the question hanging between them and the gulls above. "It's a story, kid," he said. "Some stories don't talk loud." Tommy thought about that following as they crossed the street back toward the hall. The morning breeze smelled of salt and coffee. "You ever get bored cleaning the same place every day?" "Bored," James chuckled. "I'm the janitor with better taste in dust." The boy laughed. The sound bounced off the storefront glass. Still as they reached the door, James paused. His hand brushed the outline of the metal resting in his jacket pocket, its cool edge pressing faintly through the fabric. He didn't take it out. He just stood there a moment, eyes tracing the flag he'd hung earlier, fluttering steady against the light. By late afternoon, the hall smelled of paint and disinfectant. Folding tables were stacked, the flag rolled neatly in its stand. A few younger volunteers, college students, and off-duty clerks clustered near the display cases with clipboards in hand. "We're updating the layout," one of them said. "Modern look. More digital displays." The girl with the tablet gestured toward the old case that held James's medal. "This one's got to go. We'll store the contents for now." Tommy, mopping the far end of the room, froze. The words hit him harder than he expected. "You mean you're moving Mr. Holler's stuff?" "Not his," another replied. "Just, old junk." Tommy didn't answer. He dropped the mop in the bucket and ran out the door, sneakers squeaking on the tile. He found James behind the building, sitting on a wooden bench that faced the harbor. The sky had gone pale with thin clouds. Gulls traced lazy circles overhead. "They're gonna move your medal," the boy blurted, breathless. James looked at him, then at the water. "Let them, Tommy. Dust doesn't mind being moved, but that's not fair. You worked here for years." "Fair's a young man's word," James said softly. He reached for the thermos beside him, poured a little coffee into the lid, and watched the steam curl. "Respect's not something you demand," he added. "You earn it even after they forget." The boy's shoulders slumped. He kicked at the gravel, frustrated. "So you're just gonna let them?" "I'm gonna let them learn," James said, smiling faintly. "Different lessons take different dust." The hum of traffic passed in the distance, blending with the soft lap of waves against the pier. Somewhere a foghorn called once and faded. Inside, the young crew started moving the case. Their chatter filled the hall. To them, it was just another old thing, another space to brighten. None noticed that when they lifted the glass, the light dimmed slightly, as if the room itself protested. Martha entered carrying a box of new labels. "Careful with that," she told them. "Those items belong to veterans who actually served." "We know, ma'am," a volunteer said. "We're just reorganizing." Still, she frowned. Something about touching the metal felt wrong. Meanwhile, outside, Tommy studied his grandfather. The old man looked tired but unbothered, the wind teasing the gray in his hair. Behind them, the tall doors of the hall shut with a heavy thud. He was slammed by protocol, not by hands or words, but by the quiet weight of procedure. Every regulation, every new system pressed him a little farther into the margins. Yet he stayed still, anchored by something deeper than pride. When they went back inside, the lights flickered. The new LED bulbs hummed against the ceiling panels. On the far wall above the empty space where the display once stood, hung an old wooden plaque. Its lettering faded but legible: "Service beyond duty." Tommy read it out loud. "Grandpa, that's you." James didn't reply. His eyes rested on the words as the bulbs blinked once and held steady. Minicliff. Then the light flickered once and held. Martha passed behind them with a fresh poster in her arms. She pinned it beside the stage, smoothing the corners. The printed letters caught the light. Guest of Honor, Rear Admiral Miles Grant Rhett. James stopped mid-step. The name hit him like a quiet bell. He stared for a heartbeat longer than anyone noticed. Then he turned away, his hand brushing the pocket where the medal rested, prop partial plus, hidden but waiting. Evening came soft and golden over the coast, the kind of light that made every window glow from within. Inside the Veteran Community Hall, chairs were lined in perfect rows. A faint scent of wax and coffee drifted through the air. The ceremony had begun. Martha Reed stood near the podium, her voice steady as she welcomed the crowd. The new volunteers, the older veterans, townspeople in Sunday clothes, they all gathered under the dim amber lights. Tonight, Martha said, we honor those who served and those who still serve in silence. She glanced toward the back row, where James Haller sat alone, his hands folded around a small box on his lap. His shirt was pressed but old, the collar soft from years of wear. The faint hum of an overhead fan filled the pauses between her words. Our guest of honor, she continued, Rear Admiral Miles Grant, retired. Applause rippled through the hall as Admiral Grant, tall and silver-haired, stepped to the stage. The medals on his jacket gleamed like distant stars. He spoke about duty, about generations of sailors who worked unseen, about the value of quiet service that never made headlines. But as he talked, his eyes began to drift across the room, searching faces in the audience. Then he stopped. His gaze settled on the man in the last row, on James. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The air changed as if everyone suddenly felt the pull of something important. Without a word, the Admiral straightened, then stood. The movement was simple, but the meaning was vast. The scrape of his chair legs echoed like a struck bell. Every person in the room followed. One by one, they rose to their feet, turning toward the back where James sat. No order was given, no announcement made. It was an instinct older than rank. He stood up in silence, and every word they had missed was spoken. James didn't move for a moment. His fingers brushed the lid of the small box, then opened it. The metal inside caught the light, a muted gleam, not bright, but steady. Prop reveal. It rested against his palm, trembling faintly as if breathing with him. The room stayed still. The only sound was the tick of the wall clock and the low whir of the fan. You could hear breathing, the creak of floorboards, and somewhere in the distance the slow sigh of the sea. Silent beat number 4. Time freezes. The gesture becomes a language of respect. Martha felt her throat tighten. She understood now the quiet man with the mop, the one she'd laughed at, the one who never corrected her. Tears blurred the edges of the room. Tommy looked from the Admiral to his grandfather. "Grandpa," he whispered. James turned slightly, offering a small nod to the boy. Nothing proud or grand, just peaceful acknowledgement. His expression was calm, like the ocean after a storm. The Admiral lowered his head once in salute, then held the pose. His voice, when it came, was low but carried to every corner. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we owe tonight to the man who sits among you. He taught me once that silence is not absence, it's depth." No one clapped, not yet. The moment asked for stillness. Then, as the Admiral stepped back, the applause began soft, at first uncertain, then spreading like a rising tide. Morning came bright and slow sunlight, stretching across the front steps of the Veteran Community Hall. A light breeze carried the smell of coffee and sea salt through the open doors. The town was quiet again, no speeches, no uniforms, only the aftersound of what had happened the night before. Inside, Martha Reed moved carefully around the display case. She had polished it twice already, though there was no need. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass as she dusted each shelf one last time. Then she reached for the small velvet box, opened it, and placed the medal back in the center. Her fingers brushed away a single line of dust from the plaque underneath. Someone had replaced the label overnight. The new brass plate read, "Service Beyond Duty, James Holler." She stood there a while, smiling through the quiet. The radio near the window hummed the same low tune that had played the day before. Outside the porch, swing creaked gently in rhythm. On the porch, James sat beside Tommy, each holding a cup of steaming coffee. The swing moved back and forth, soft as breathing. Beyond the railing, the harbor shimmered like a sheet of glass. "They're calling it the Holler Hall now," Tommy said, grinning. James took a sip before answering. "Hope they spelled it right." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes loose the tension that's been hiding too long. A mail truck rumbled past the corner, the driver waving once. Martha waved back from the doorway. She had traded her clipboard for a broom and didn't seem to mind the change. "Why didn't you tell them who you were?" Tommy asked. James leaned back, the swing creaking beneath them. "Didn't need to," he said. "Admiral did the talking." "Guess medals do talk, huh?" the boy teased. James smiled, setting his cup down on the wooden railing. "Only if you listen." For a moment they both looked through the window where the medal sat gleaming under the morning light. It didn't shine loudly. It just reflected what was already there. The patience of years, the quiet pride of work done right. Prop echo. The sunlight caught the metal edge and flickered across the glass, a small echo of the night before. Tommy reached for the radio dial and turned the volume up just enough to hear the music drift outside. The same soft station, the one that played Stand By Me, came through again, fuzzy but warm. The porch filled with the sounds of birds in the elm tree, the shuffle of feet on the sidewalk, and the whisper of a flag brushing against its pole. James rocked the swing a little faster, pretending to scold. "Careful, kid. You'll spill your wisdom all over the porch." Tommy grinned. "You started it." James shrugged, eyes closing halfway against the sun. "Then I guess I'll clean it up later." "I'm the janitor, remember?" Martha appeared at the doorway, wiping her hands on a rag. "Coffee's going cold," she called. "So are we," James said, "but it's not a bad way to age." She smiled, shaking her head. The three of them stayed there, letting the swing move, letting the silence do its work. A full year passed. The seasons turned softly over the coast of Maine, summer storms, the hush of autumn, the clean silence of snow. By spring, the town had added something new to its library, a small wing off the main hall built to honor the veterans who'd once gathered by the sea. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows of the library veterans wing. Children's voices echoed faintly from the reading room next door, their laughter bending around the corners like music. In the center of the new room hung a brass plaque freshly polished by the custodian that morning. "Service Beyond Words, James Holler." The letters glowed under the warm yellow light, simple and steady, just like the man himself. Beneath the plaque, a display case stood with the medal resting at its center. Not in its old velvet box anymore, but on a small stand lined with navy cloth. Next to it lay a folded flag, a photograph of the hall, and a note in Martha's handwriting, donated by the Holler family, in honor of service quietly rendered. Tommy, now taller, now a little more sure of himself, walked in with two classmates. He wore his school jacket zipped halfway, and a grin that tried not to look too proud. "That's him," he said softly. "My grandpa." His friends leaned closer to the glass. "He was the janitor," right one whispered. "Yeah," Tommy said. "And more." He stepped closer, resting his fingertips lightly on the edge of the case, careful not to smudge the glass. It was never just a medal. The line left his mouth like a breath, barely a whisper, but it filled the room all the same. Title Echo. Pass Token Medal. Statement, and due 100%. A librarian passing by paused and smiled. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Yeah," Tommy replied, "still shining." He looked up at the plaque again. The reflection of the medal shimmered across the metal letters, as though the two had become one-story object and name sharing the same light. Through the open window came the soft chorus of a choir practicing down the street. The voices drifting like prayer, silent beat number 6. Fade begins choir hum, merges with room silence. A radio near the librarian's desk crackled to life. The familiar warm voice of the community station announcer filled the air. This week marks 1 year since the dedication of the Holler Hall and the Veterans Wing. We remember James Holler not for what he said, but for what he stood for. A pause. Then that voice, steady and kind, continued. The quietest heroes often carry the loudest legacies. The choir swelled faintly in the background. If this story moved you, share it forward. The microphone clicked off. The camera would linger on the medal one last time, its surface glowing amber beneath the library lights. The reflection caught in Tommy's eyes, a bridge between generations, between what is kept and what is remembered. Outside, the bells of the church down the street chimed noon. The sound carried over the rooftops, over the quiet hall, by the water, over every small town that still knew how to stand in silence. And the medal, still and shining, spoke for all of them. The library stayed warm that afternoon, sunlight slipping through stained glass and scattering across the floorboards. Tommy brushed his hand against the display case, tracing the glow of his grandfather's medal, the proof of a life spent quietly writing what others forgot. Still, the sound of a distant choir drifted through an open window, soft like memory breathing. The plaque above the medal read, "Service beyond words," a simple sentence that carried everything that couldn't be said. And as the boy turned to leave, he glanced back once more.